Sir, please step aside. First class is for premium passengers. Dominic Taylor blinked once, calmly. In his hand was a leather briefcase. On his wrist, a platinum Rolex. And in the other hand, his first-class boarding pass, seat 2A, clear as day. But the flight attendant wasn't looking at the ticket. She was looking at him. Karen Wilson's designer handbag sat arrogantly in his assigned seat, and now she glared at him like he was trespassing. "I think there's been a mistake," Dominic said, voice level. "Oh, there has," Karen replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That seat is taken." Other passengers watched. Whispers buzzed. No one moved. The lead attendant arrived. "Sir, we can reassign you to a different seat. Perhaps economy." Dominic's jaw clenched not in anger, but in memory. This wasn't the first time, but today would be the last. He took one breath, one pause, one final look at seat 2A before security officers arrived. As they escorted him off the plane, Karen smiled and gently placed her handbag back on the seat. Before we dive into this true story of prejudice and power, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more eye-opening stories like this. The wheels of Dominic's carry-on echoed through the terminal as two uniformed security officers flanked him, one to the left, one to the right, leading him away like a suspect. The absurdity of it all pulsed beneath his calm exterior, each step reminding him of just how public this humiliation had become. Behind him, the plane door hissed shut. Ahead, hundreds of curious travelers paused mid-scroll and mid-sentence, eyes drawn to the image of a well-dressed black man being removed from a first-class boarding gate. Dominic didn't speak. Not yet. He had learned long ago that silence could be louder than outrage. "Keep moving, sir," one officer said, his voice flat. Dominic gave a tight nod but didn't quicken his pace. He wasn't going to be rushed through this walk of shame. Not after everything he'd worked for. Not after everything he represented. He passed a group of teenage boys with earbuds dangling and mouths agape. One of them lifted a phone, recording discreetly. Further down the concourse, a couple in business attire exchanged glances. The man looked down, uncomfortable. The woman kept staring. Dominic's tailored suit fit flawlessly. His posture was straight, dignified. He looked like a man who owned the very airline that was dragging him through its terminal. Ironically, in some ways, he did. Next-Gen Solutions had licensing partnerships with 3 of Atlantic Airways' tech vendors. He wondered if anyone here knew that. Probably not. And that was the point. He arrived at the customer service desk, where a young agent named Lisa Chen was typing rapidly behind the counter. She barely looked up. "Please take a seat," she said. "I'll stand," Dominic replied evenly, his voice betraying none of the storm behind his eyes. Lisa raised her eyebrows, but didn't protest. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't loud. He just stood there, a quiet refusal to shrink, a refusal to be erased. 10 minutes passed. 20. Passengers came and went. Agents called names and printed new tickets. No one acknowledged him again. Dominic slowly placed a single item on the counter, his executive platinum card. The kind of card issued only to the airline's highest value travelers. Lisa glanced at it, then did a double take. Her posture shifted. Her fingers froze mid-keystroke. "Mr. Taylor," she said. This time with the hesitancy of someone realizing they may have made a very big mistake. He said nothing, simply looked her in the eye. Let me call a supervisor," she added, picking up the phone so quickly she nearly dropped it. Dominic turned away, pretending to check his phone. Behind the screen, his mind was sharp, calculating. He wasn't here for an apology. He wasn't here for compensation. He was here because this moment wasn't new, but it was visible, and he intended to make sure it wouldn't be forgotten. 20 years ago, he would have been escorted out of a campus library for looking suspicious. 10 years ago, mistaken for IT support during a pitch for his first $5 million funding round. 5 years ago, misidentified as security detail during a government tech partnership negotiation. And now he was a billionaire CEO with global influence, a Forbes cover, and software changing how the visually impaired navigate the world. But in the eyes of Atlantic Airways, he was still someone who didn't belong in seat 2A. Lisa returned, visibly paler, accompanied by a balding man in his 50s with a name badge that read, James Morris Gate Supervisor. Mr. Taylor, James began, with the overly cheerful tone people reserve for those they suspect might file lawsuits. I understand there was a small issue on board. So sorry for the mix-up. Dominic raised an eyebrow. A mix-up? Yes, just a seating confusion. Happens all the time. James chuckled nervously. We'd like to offer you a seat on our next available flight to San Francisco and a $200 voucher for the inconvenience. Dominic stared at him. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice calm, but suddenly very cold. Did the woman who placed her bag in my seat get escorted off the plane? James stiffened. Well, no. So the person who followed protocol and asked to sit in the seat they paid for was removed. While the person who violated policy was accommodated, James shifted. Sir, I assure you, race had nothing to do with Dominic cut him off with a single, piercing glance. I didn't mention race. You did. James opened his mouth, then closed it. Dominic leaned in, just enough for only James to hear. Call your legal department. Tell them they'll want to be ready, because what happened today, it won't be swept under the rug. He turned, walking calmly toward the United Club lounge, leaving behind a stunned supervisor and a now terrified Lisa. Dominic didn't need to yell. He had other ways of being heard. Back inside the cabin of Flight 372, silence gave way to whispers. Passengers exchanged glances, unsure of what they had just witnessed. A well-dressed black man had been escorted off the plane not for shouting, not for threatening, not for being drunk, but for asking to sit in the seat printed on his ticket. Across the aisle. Dr. Aisha Johnson stared at the empty seat 2A, her heart pounding. She hadn't known the man's name, but she'd seen the grace with which he carried himself, the quiet resistance in his voice, and the unjust way he had been treated. And she knew exactly what had just happened. She reached for her phone. Her fingers moved quickly. Captioning a video just watched a black man removed from Flight 372 after a white woman refused to move her handbag from his first-class seat. He was calm, respectful, and had a valid ticket. The staff backed her. This is what discrimination looks like in 2025. Atlantic Airways, flying while black. She hit post. The upload took less than 30 seconds. But in those seconds, it began the moment a private act of bias became a public reckoning. In row 6, a teenage girl nudged her mother. Mom, did you see that? Yes, sweetheart, her mother said, not looking up from her phone. But don't get involved. But he didn't do anything wrong, the girl whispered. That woman just lied. In the back of the plane, a college student live-tweeting his trip typed dude in first class just got kicked off for asking to sit in his seat. Crew backed the Karen with the handbag. Wow. Flight 372, Atlantic Airways. 2 rows behind where Dominic had once stood, a man in a gray blazer turned to his wife. Was that really necessary? His wife shrugged. It's not our business, but it was someone's, and that someone was already watching. In the cockpit, Captain Benjamin Walsh was on a call with Atlantic Airways operations. He rubbed his forehead as the dispatcher relayed the unfolding firestorm on social media. A doctor on board. Video posted. Already at 12,000 views and climbing. Looks bad. Really bad. Define bad. Walsh asked. #trending. Atlantic Airways racism. Walsh exhaled, looking out the cockpit window. We may have made a mistake. Back in first class, Karen Wilson sat comfortably in seat 2A, the handbag once used as a gatekeeping tool now resting in her lap like a trophy. I saved our seats. She beamed at her husband, who had just boarded, breathless. Some man tried to take it, but I told them no. William Wilson frowned, pulling out his boarding pass. Karen, we're in row 3, not 2. Karen blinked. What, we're in 3A and 3B. See, he pointed. That man was right. That was his seat. The color drained from her face as she fumbled for her own pass. She didn't speak, but others did. Passengers in earshot began murmuring. A man in row 5 leaned forward. So, she got him kicked off, and he was right. Another voice. Are you serious? All this because she couldn't check a ticket. A teenage boy in the back uploaded a video snippet of Karen Smugly sitting in seat 2A. He added a caption. When you realize the Karen who got the man kicked off wasn't even in her own seat. This aged poorly Atlantic Airways. The post caught fire within minutes. Jordan Ellis, NextGen's PR director, received an alert on her media dashboard. A video from Dr. Aisha Johnson was gaining traction. She tapped into a group call. Dominic, we have our first narrative anchor. A Dr. Credible Witness posted a video. It's already hitting 20,000 views and being reshared by advocacy pages. Dominic, seated in a quiet private suite at the United Club Lounge, nodded. Good. Make sure it stays visible. Elevate her voice. Not mine yet. He wasn't ready to speak, but he wanted the world to listen. Across the terminal. Lisa Chen stared at her screen. Notifications exploded, media outlets requesting statements, hashtags trending, news alerts flashing red. And at gate C-17, the lead flight attendant, Michael Parker, paced. His earpiece buzzed with updates from corporate. Flight delay justified as technical, the voice said. But keep everyone calm. Do not mention the passenger removal unless asked. Michael's throat was dry. He stared down the jetbridge, wondering how this had unraveled so quickly. In first class, Karen whispered to her husband. Do you think people are recording me? William didn't answer. He was too busy checking Twitter, inside the cockpit. Captain Walsh received another call, this one from the airline's crisis communications director. Captain, delay takeoff. We need time to assess the situation. Don't mention discrimination. Say it's a mechanical delay. Understood, Walsh replied stiffly. He ended the call, stood for a moment, and stared through the front windshield. A plane waiting on a tarmac, while the world around it exploded. Back in first class, the atmosphere had shifted from polite disinterest to palpable discomfort. Karen Wilson, now seated in row 3 as her husband gently insisted, kept glancing around. Whispers were louder now, cell phones tilted discreetly, screens glowing. She knew the look, the one that said, "You've been caught." Meanwhile, Dr. Aisha Johnson's phone buzzed again. The post she uploaded was now at 97,000 views. She refreshed once. 101, 300. She didn't expect this level of attention, but now that it was happening, she refused to back down. Opening her camera again, she recorded a follow-up to the executives at Atlantic Airways. To anyone watching this, what happened today wasn't just inconvenient. It was systemic. I've been through it. We all have. But this time, the world saw it happen in real time. She hit post. Again. At the same moment, Jasmine Holt, Dominic's longtime assistant, was furiously typing on her laptop from NextGen's downtown Chicago office. Her eyes flicked between 3 screens: the flight manifest, news alerts, and the real-time sentiment dashboard from their PR team. "Jordan," she said into the phone, "if this goes unchecked, they'll twist the story by tonight. We need to anchor it in facts. Jordan Ellis, monitoring trends from New York." Responded, "Already building a press dossier. We'll frame the narrative around behavior, policy failure, and silence in the face of bias, not Dominic's celebrity." "Smart," Jasmine replied, "because they still don't know who they threw off that flight." Across the country, in the boardroom of Atlantic Airways' New York HQ, executives were panicking. The legal team had pulled up the video. The marketing team was counting trending hashtags: flying while black, seat 2A, designer bag discrimination, Atlantic Airways racism. Over 6 million views combined, and climbing. CEO Robert Harrison sat at the head of the table, his fists clenched. How did we not know who this man was before we dragged him off the damn plane? No one answered. Then a marketing exec muttered, "Because no one thought he belonged there." Silence. Back in the United Club lounge, Dominic sat quietly, scrolling. The internet was already doing its work. Stories, threads, personal accounts from other black passengers began surfacing. Atlantic kicked me off a flight in 2023 because a white couple said I looked suspicious. I was moved from first class to coach after a seating error. Still waiting for that refund. Dominic copied 3 of them. Forwarded them to Victoria, Washington, his general counsel. Build the class action. We're not alone. Meanwhile, on board Flight 372. Flight attendant Brittany Coleman approached Karen and her husband William, offering water. Karen hissed under her breath. "Can't you get these people to stop staring? I feel attacked." Brittany's professional smile faltered. Something about Karen's tone, the irony, cut too close now. "Passengers are concerned," Brittany said. "That's understandable." Karen narrowed her eyes. "I deserve an apology. That man made a scene. I was just protecting my seat." William, now visibly uncomfortable, muttered, "Karen, let's stop talking." She ignored him. Just then, Brittany's earpiece buzzed. A corporate directive had arrived: de-escalate situation. Do not remove any more passengers. FAA monitors may be incoming. She turned to go and nearly collided with 2 uniformed FAA agents stepping into the jetbridge. Her heart stopped. They showed ID to Michael Parker, the lead flight attendant. "We're investigating a possible safety protocol violation." One said, "Please notify the captain we'll be speaking to crew and reviewing passenger statements." Karen paled. William looked at her. "What did you do outside the aircraft?" Reporters were gathering near security barriers, tipped off by passengers live tweeting updates. Terminals buzzed with activity as travelers realized something huge was happening at Gate C-17. And in a nearby corner of the lounge, Lisa Chen stared at her screen in horror. Her terminal had just updated with Dominic's full profile: Dominic Taylor, CEO, NextGen Solutions, 3.2B net worth, Advisory Board, Department of Transportation. She blinked twice, then gasped, "Oh my God." Her supervisor, James Morris, was already halfway through a disciplinary form, confident he'd dodged the bullet by offering a voucher. Lisa turned her monitor so he could see. James dropped his pen. As Dominic sat quietly in the United Club lounge, the hum of muted conversations and the clink of coffee cups faded behind him. His tablet rested idle on the table. The news alerts, the PR updates, the legal summaries all momentarily ignored, because something deeper had surfaced. A memory. He was 11 years old again, seated in the back of a crowded school bus, the only black student on the private academy route. His backpack had been knocked to the floor. A classmate had taken his window seat. When he'd spoken up, the driver barked, "Stop causing trouble. Boy, sit down." No one said a word in his defense, and he had sat down, not in his rightful seat, but in silence. That silence had followed him to the university library, where a campus officer once asked if he was lost even though he was a teaching assistant, to investor boardrooms, where questions about his leadership came wrapped in compliments about how well-spoken he was, to corporate banquets, where hosts assumed he was valet, and now to this terminal, where a flight crew had removed him from a seat he had paid for because a white woman said she didn't feel safe. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. He had simply refused to move his body to a section more appropriate for someone like him. Dominic Victoria's voice broke through the memory as her face appeared via secure video call. His chief legal counsel looked determined, brows furrowed behind smart glasses. "I have news and questions." He nodded, refocusing. "We're collecting statements. Doctor, Aisha Johnson's video is gold. She's articulate, credible, and already verified on multiple platforms. We'll need to reach out to her. She'll cooperate," Dominic said softly. She risked something when she spoke up. "We'll make sure she knows that matters," Victoria continued. "Also, Jasmine and I compiled a legal brief on past incidents involving Atlantic Airways. 7 removals in 14 months. All passengers of color. Most settled quietly." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Patterns. Exactly. The data's building our case for systemic bias. But Dominic..." She paused. "This is going to get loud. Personal. They'll dig into you." He met her gaze. "Let them." A pause. "Good," she said. "Because we're filing in federal court by Friday. Class action certification in motion." He nodded, then leaned back and exhaled, eyes drifting again to the past. Another memory surfaced. Senior year of high school. National coding competition. He had built a speech-to-text interface for visually impaired students, the only black finalist. During awards, the MC skipped his name. When corrected, the man laughed nervously and said, "Didn't expect it to be you." "Son, good for you." He'd smiled then, but it hadn't been a real smile, because he had already learned that success doesn't shield you from disbelief. It often amplifies it. Dominic glanced at the real-time market feed on his screen. Atlantic Airways stock had dropped another 4%. The ripple effects were becoming seismic. In another corner of the terminal, a group of young black professionals who had witnessed the incident were now huddled together, comparing footage. "I got the part where the woman said he made her uncomfortable." One said, "I caught the gate agent brushing him off." "Wanna stitch the clips?" another offered. They did. A few seats away, an older black couple sat in silence. The husband finally murmured, "I've been flying 30 years. Still feels like we need permission to sit in the front." His wife took his hand. "Not today." Outside the airport, a reporter began a live stream. We're here at O'Hare where a viral incident involving a black tech CEO being removed from a first-class seat has ignited a firestorm. In the cabin of Flight 372, the tension had reached critical mass. The flight still hadn't taken off. The FAA investigators were now interviewing crew members. One agent reviewed the seating chart. Mr. Taylor was assigned to 2A. Can you confirm who's seated there now? Karen Wilson glanced up nervously, then looked away. The agent noted her reaction. In the lounge, Dominic's phone buzzed again. A message from Senator Anthony Richardson. Just got word from FAA. You have their attention. Let me know when you're ready to raise the stakes. Dominic stared at the message, then turned back to the window, watching another Atlantic Airways jet idle on the tarmac. And as he sat there, calm, composed, and silent, the weight of every past humiliation didn't crush him. It centered him. Because this time, the silence wouldn't be surrender. It would be strategy. While the nation's attention slowly shifted to the unfolding chaos at O'Hare, Dominic Taylor's war room was already forming not in a boardroom, not in a courtroom, but across 3 phone lines, 2 encrypted chat threads, and the unspoken code of professionals who knew how to move in silence. Jordan, Dominic said into his headset as he stepped into a soundproof conference pod inside the United Club lounge. I want the media packages drafted, but not released. Not yet. Just prepare every version. One tailored for CNBC, another for MSNBC, one with a focus on civil rights, and one for tech equity. Jordan Ellis, his PR director, responded instantly. Already halfway there. I've got a full visual archive, timeline of events, seat assignment proof, and video receipts. I've pulled Dr. Johnson's original post as anchor media. Good, Dominic replied, but I don't want this to feel like a celebrity tantrum. We're not making this about me. The face of this can't be power. It has to be principle. Jordan paused, then said softly, Understood. Dominic ended the call and took a breath. His next call went out to Quinn Atwater, his CTO at NextGen and an expert in adaptive systems. Quinn, I need you to pull every contract we have with Atlantic Airways and any of their subcontractors. I want to know which of our products are still active in their infrastructure. Doing that now, Quinn said without question. Are we pulling licenses? Not yet, but I want the option ready. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Quinn understood what this meant. If NextGen yanked its tech support and accessibility systems from Atlantic's app and website, millions of users would immediately feel the loss, and the Department of Transportation would take notice. Next, Dominic turned to his most trusted contact, Victoria Washington, his chief legal counsel and longtime partner in justice-focused litigation. Victoria, I want our legal comms isolated, full encryption, and I want a list of every flight discrimination case filed in the past 5 years. Start flagging any that involve Delta, United, Southwest, and especially Atlantic. Her voice remained steady, focused. Already pulled a database. There's enough to begin shaping a broader legal coalition. Perfect. Reach out to the ACLU. Ask quietly. Just float my name. Understood. Dominic ended the call and sat still for a moment. Eyes closed. He didn't need to shout. The weight of power didn't need noise. It moved like gravity, silent, undeniable, constant. At the same time, across the airport in a cramped break room, flight attendant Brittany Coleman sat alone, scrolling through the videos being shared from her own flight. Her hands trembled. She had followed procedure. At least, what she thought was procedure. Defer to high-tier passengers. Avoid conflict. De-escalate, even when it meant validating the aggressor. But now, seeing herself in someone's shaky phone footage, her plastic smile replaying as she suggested Mr. Taylor consider an economy seat, made her stomach twist. Had she really smiled through that? Her phone buzzed with a message from a fellow flight attendant girl. "We're going viral. Seat 2A situation. You okay?" She didn't answer. In a private group chat of Atlantic Airways staff, messages were flying. I was on that flight. It's worse than what's online. Y'all, this is going national. I heard the guy's a billionaire CEO. We messed up bad. No, the system messed up. We just do what we're told. You think that's going to protect us now somewhere? A shift was happening. Not loud, not explosive, but slow and tectonic, like a fault line that had always been there, now beginning to break. Back in the United Club lounge, Jasmine, Dominic's assistant, appeared in person. She had rushed from NextGen's Chicago office to O'Hare without asking permission. "Jazz," Dominic said. "Surprised? I couldn't just sit there," she replied. "I've got a backup tablet, press kits, and a list of every tech partner Atlantic works with." He smiled for the first time that day. "That's why you're irreplaceable." "I know," she said. "Also, I scheduled a closed-door call with Senator Richardson in an hour. I told him you'd be ready." Dominic nodded. Then Jasmine said something quieter. "And your father's old friend, Reverend Charles, called. He saw the footage. Said to remind you, this isn't the fire, it's the fuel." Dominic's breath caught. That was something his father would have said. He looked out the window again. Another Atlantic jet sat stalled on the tarmac. Ground crew standing idle. Passengers pacing inside terminals. The system wasn't cracking. It was bracing. And Dominic Taylor had only just begun tightening the screws. The quiet of the United Club lounge was beginning to fray. Dominic Taylor sat with his fingers interlocked, elbows on the polished oak table, the light above casting a warm glow over his otherwise motionless frame. He hadn't moved in minutes, not physically, but beneath the stillness, pressure was building not inside him, but around him. Atlantic Airways executives were now on hour 3 of damage control, but their calls were no longer being returned. PR firms were ghosting. Legal counsel was hedging. And stockholders. They were fleeing. Meanwhile, Twitter feeds and TikTok reels burned with commentary. Dominic Taylor removed for asking to sit in his own seat. "We're still doing this in 2025. This isn't just racism, it's systemic confidence in injustice. Like, they were sure no one would care. White woman puts bag in 2A. Black CEO gets removed. And she's the victim inside the cabin of Flight 372. The atmosphere had gone from curious to hostile. The FAA agents were now visibly reviewing security footage on a tablet, one of them nodding grimly as passengers offered quiet commentary. One woman from row 5 leaned forward to the agent. He was calm, professional, never raised his voice. She was acting entitled. Karen Wilson stared straight ahead, her posture tight, her hands clutching her designer bag like a lifeline. Her husband, William, had slid his seat 2 rows back, creating distance he hadn't previously imagined he'd need in a marriage. Across the aisle. Dr. Aisha Johnson continued to refresh her feed. The original video had crossed 2 million views. Verified accounts were retweeting. Celebrities were commenting. And advocacy organizations were asking to speak with her directly. Her hands shook. not from fear, but from the recognition of what was happening. For the first time in her professional life, her voice, her witness was being taken seriously. Back in Atlantic's Chicago regional office, Patricia Armstrong, regional director of operations, stood in front of a glass wall, staring at a massive digital dashboard tracking incident fallout. The numbers were bleeding red. 25 flights grounded nationwide due to technical delays. Over 180,000 mentions of the company in less than 6 hours. Their average customer sentiment had dropped from 4.2 stars to 1.9. The calls from the FAA weren't just warning tones anymore, they were subpoenas in the making. A junior analyst rushed in. Ms. Armstrong, news just broke that Mr. Taylor's legal team has filed a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Transportation. It's gone public. Armstrong turned slowly, her voice low and tight. And has anyone on the corporate team contacted him directly? Yet silence? Find out where he is. She snapped. Now. Back in the lounge. Dominic's phone lit up with an incoming call. Robert Harrison, CEO, Atlantic Airways. He let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. He declined the call. Jasmine looked at him, arching a brow. You're letting it boil. Dominic didn't answer. Instead, he opened a secure message from Senator Anthony Richardson, who had sent a 1-line update FAA preparing to extend investigation to entire fleet. Brace for a national grounding. Dominic forwarded the message to Victoria, then, without looking up, said, They're about to feel what unchecked power meets when it hits earned power. Jordan Ellis chimed in through his earpiece. Dominic, the hashtags have gone nuclear. Seat 2A is now trending #1 globally. Someone unearthed Atlantic's 2018 diversity report. It's empty. No inclusion strategy. No metrics. Keep letting it rise. Dominic replied. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was Patricia Armstrong. He answered. Calmly. No emotion. Mr. Taylor, she began, her voice already cracking under the strain. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. We take these matters very seriously, and Dominic interrupted. Where were you 2 hours ago? I was coordinating damage control, not accountability, he said evenly. And now you've lost control. Mr. Taylor. She tried again. We'd like to offer a formal apology, seat you on the next flight in our highest class suite, and compensate. He cut her off. Patricia, I'm not interested in convenience packages. I'm interested in systemic correction. Silence. Then he added, start by grounding every flight you can, because the FAA is about to do it for you. Patricia swallowed hard. I understand. You don't yet, Dominic said. But you will. As he ended the call, Jasmine leaned forward. They're cracking. Dominic looked at her, not smiling. No, he said softly. They're just starting to sweat. In the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of Next Gen Solutions, the pulse of a rebellion was beating not with chants or banners, but with keyboards clicking, Slack threads pinging, and legal PDFs zipping across servers. The entire communications floor had gone into silent overdrive. Dominic Taylor wasn't just responding to injustice anymore. He was engineering its collapse. Jordan, he said over a secure Zoom line, the new press packet. Add the full diversity audit we commissioned last year. I want people to see the contrast. Jordan Ellis nodded from his Manhattan office, already tapping commands into her touchpad. On it. We're including third-party evaluations, Side-by-side comparisons with Atlantic's 2018 and 2021 inclusion reports. Spoiler, they're paper-thin. Good, Dominic said. We're not just fighting, we're educating. Meanwhile, back at O'Hare. Patricia Armstrong had retreated into an empty conference room, pale and breathless. She clutched a company-issued tablet showing real-time headlines. Dominic Taylor removed from first-class seat. FIA responds, Black CEO removed for asking to sit where he belonged. #Seat2A Sparks. Corporate firestorm. A knock at the door startled her. It was Lisa Chen, the front desk agent from earlier. She looked shaken, but resolute. "Ma'am," Lisa said quietly, "I think you should see this." She handed over her own phone. A leaked screenshot. Internal Atlantic Airways training material from 2022. When in doubt, avoid confrontations in premium cabins. High-value passengers. Platinum, Diamond. Concierge should be prioritized whenever possible to prevent dissatisfaction. Patricia's face twisted. Who leaked this? Lisa didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The leak was intentional. Across the country, internal resistance was taking route flight attendants, customer service agents, and operations staff who had silently followed discriminatory policies for years were now stepping forward. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with receipts. Private Discord channels opened up. Former employees shared NDAs. Some uploaded redacted customer incident logs showing a clear pattern. Passengers of color disproportionately moved when disputes arose. Complaints from Black passengers downgraded in priority. Code phrases like unverified boarding issue used as euphemisms for biased removals. It wasn't one employee. It was the company culture. And now, the company's own people were starting to dismantle it from within. In Los Angeles, a former Atlantic training manager posted anonymously on LinkedIn, "I taught the new hires. I watched what we normalized, and I regret every PowerPoint slide that told staff to trust instinct when instinct was built on bias." That post hit 800,000 views in 4 hours. At the same time, a grassroots uprising was exploding on social media. Graphic designers, activists, and digital strategists began rebranding the entire scandal under one potent visual, Seat 2A. Mock airline boarding passes began circulating online parodies stamped, "Reassigned for racism," with Dominic's name where passenger should be. Streetwear brands rushed to print T-shirts with 2A on the chest in minimalist font. One viral design placed a luxury handbag over the number, crossed out in red. It was no longer just a scandal. It was a symbol. In the lounges of O'Hare, passengers were whispering, "That's the guy, right, Dominic Taylor, from NextGen. He's the one that got kicked off. No, he's the one who's about to shut them down." Dominic, now surrounded by his small mobile team. Jasmine, 2 legal aides, and a quietly expanding circle of allies watched a live stream of Dr. Aisha Johnson being interviewed by a local Chicago news station. "I spoke up because too often people like me are taught to shrink," Dr. Johnson said. "But today, we saw what happens when someone refuses to, and it's changing everything." Dominic turned to Jasmine. "Where's Brittany Coleman?" The flight attendant Jasmine asked. Dominic nodded. "Yes, she's not the root of this, but she's part of the picture. And if she's brave enough to tell the truth, she might help tip the system." Jasmine began making calls. Back at Atlantic HQ, CEO Robert Harrison was facing a full mutiny. Board members were calling emergency sessions. Legal counsel was begging him to settle quietly. And in a dim corner of a flight crew break room at O'Hare, Brittany Coleman sat alone, scrolling through news, through tweets, through footage where her own voice played back like a scripted betrayal. She closed her eyes, then opened her email. Subject line, "I need to talk." Brittany Coleman. And she typed, "With trembling hands, I was the flight attendant on 372. I need to tell the truth. I don't want to be silent anymore." She hit send, not knowing that on the other end. Dominic Taylor was already waiting. Dominic stared at the email on his screen. Subject, "I need to talk. Brittany Coleman." He had expected silence, a delay, maybe even legal resistance. Instead, he received something rarer, voluntary truth. Jasmine stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "She's ready." He nodded once. "Schedule the call. Privately. No recording." "Not yet." Minutes later, Brittany Coleman appeared on a secure video call. The nervous tension in her shoulders betrayed the storm inside her. She looked nothing like the smiling, composed flight attendant from the viral footage. "Mr. Taylor," she began, eyes darting slightly. "I want to apologize." Dominic raised a hand gently. "You don't need to apologize to me. Not yet. Just tell me what you know." She exhaled. "I followed procedure. That's what they tell us, de-escalate. Protect high-value passengers. I didn't think. I just did what we're trained to do. Platinum members come first. But no one says what that really means." Dominic's eyes stayed on hers. "Say it." She hesitated, then spoke the words that had lived unsaid in thousands of corporate handbooks. "It means white. It means rich. It means not you." Jasmine's fingers were already typing. Victoria Washington, looped silently into the call, was taking notes, her lawyer's mind piecing together patterns from Brittany's testimony. Then Brittany did something no one expected. She lifted her company-issued iPad and turned it to the camera. "Look," she said, scrolling through internal documents, saved screenshots, forwarded memos, crew bulletins from the past 3 years. Highlighted phrases jumped off the screen. "Be mindful of perceptions in first-class optics matter. If a situation escalates, default to relocating the less disruptive passenger. Avoid confrontation with premium status customers, even when seating assignments are in conflict." Each phrase was vague enough to deny, but specific enough to guide action. Dominic felt the weight of them like chains not on him, but on every traveler who had ever been made to feel like a guest in a space they had already paid for. "Can you send those files?" Victoria asked. Brittany nodded. "Already did. Encrypted folder. I'm also forwarding a log of incident reports from my base. I flagged the ones I knew weren't fair." Dominic leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You just changed everything." Back at NextGen's headquarters, Quinn Atwater called in. "Dom, you're going to want to see this." A new dashboard appeared on Dominic's screen. It was an overlay of customer complaint data scraped from the Department of Transportation's public filings, paired with demographic data and outcomes. Quinn's voice came through clear. "We ran comparative analysis across 6 major airlines. Guess which one leads the industry in passenger removals from first class involving black travelers?" Dominic didn't answer. He didn't have to. "Atlantic Airways." Quinn confirmed. "By a lot." Jasmine stepped forward. "Is it actionable?" Victoria replied without hesitation. "With Brittany's documentation, absolutely. And the FAA already suspects systemic bias. This seals it." As the evidence mounted, so did the impact. In media rooms across the country, journalists updated breaking news segments. On MSNBC, a legal analyst declared, "We now have proof, not speculation, that Atlantic Airways operated with internal bias embedded in daily policy. This goes beyond one incident. This is structural." On Twitter, new hashtags exploded. Data doesn't lie. Bias by design. Systemic clearance. A viral thread emerged titled, "The Real Cost of Seat 2A," linking every data point to the human story from Dominic's experience to Brittany's confession, to past passengers who were moved, silenced, or ignored. Even airline competitors began posting statements, carefully distancing themselves from Atlantic at Delta. "We reaffirm our commitment to equitable service and transparent accountability. Southwest Airlines does not condone discriminatory practices of any kind. We're watching developments closely." Inside Atlantic Airways, the effect was immediate. The board demanded an emergency audit. HR scrambled to freeze access to employee discussion threads too late. Dozens of current and former workers had already begun sharing stories with journalists. In one leaked email chain, a supervisor explicitly told a flight crew, "Make sure the cabin looks the part. If it doesn't feel premium, people won't pay premium." The words ignited outrage. Across Instagram, influencers and celebrities reposted the screenshot with captions like, "Translation, remove the black folks." Back in the lounge, Dominic sat surrounded by stillness. The data had spoken, and now the world was listening. The first major network to break the story in full was CBS News, at exactly 5:00 p.m. Eastern. Their flagship evening broadcast opened not with politics or global headlines, but with 5 chilling words. Discrimination at 30,000 feet. Dominic Taylor's image filled the screen captured from the terminal security camera as he was escorted away. Below it, the chyron read, "Black Tech CEO removed from first-class seat. FAA and Senate launch investigations." Anchor Gail Houghton led the segment. This evening, a viral incident at Chicago O'Hare International Airport has sparked national outrage. Dominic Taylor, CEO of Next Gen Solutions, was forcibly removed from his assigned first-class seat after a white passenger refused to vacate his space. Internal documents obtained today reveal a pattern of biased enforcement by Atlantic Airways employees, and tonight, officials from the FAA and U.S. Senate are promising swift accountability. The report cut to a side-by-side montage. On one side, Dr. Aisha Johnson calmly describing the incident. On the other, Brittany Coleman's recorded admission, verified and time-stamped. In the control room of Atlantic Airways' New York headquarters, CEO Robert Harrison watched in silence as the story unfolded across multiple channels. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. "Sir," his communications director said softly, "we're at saturation. It's on every network." And he didn't finish. He didn't need to, because at that moment, the FAA made it official. Every screen in Atlantic's command center lit up with the same urgent red headline. "Breaking FAA grounds, entire Atlantic Airways fleet. Pending discrimination investigation across the country. Planes on taxiways were ordered back to gates. Boarding gates closed. Flights that had just departed were told to return to origin airports if safe to do so. Airline apps crashed as thousands of passengers tried to rebook. The airline's entire operation over 200 flights had been brought to a halt." In a press conference from Washington, Senator Anthony Richardson stood at a podium, flanked by civil rights leaders and transportation officials. "We've seen the video. We've reviewed the documents. And we've heard the people. What happened to Mr. Taylor was not an isolated misstep. It reflects a broader pattern of discriminatory practices that will no longer be tolerated in American aviation. Behind him, a giant screen displayed a graphic titled Systemic Disparities in Passenger Removal 1924. Atlantic Airways topped every category. The room buzzed as reporters snapped photos and tweeted updates in real time. Dominic didn't watch it live. He didn't need to. He felt it. The tremor beneath the floor of the lounge. The subtle but unmistakable shift in the eyes of staff passing by. Recognition replacing avoidance. He was no longer just the man who got removed. He was now the man who refused to disappear. Jasmine turned to him. "We're trending in 27 countries. Even CNN International picked it up." "Good," he said softly. "Let them all see." In the Atlantic Airways Customer Service Center, phones rang without pause. Agents scrambled to calm furious customers stranded mid-journey. "Why are we grounded? Who is Dominic Taylor? Why didn't you just let him sit in his seat?" At gate C-17, the epicenter of the storm, an exhausted crew member whispered to a colleague, "This is the worst day in company history." "No," the colleague replied, eyes glued to her phone. "This might be the last day." At the center of the whirlpool, Karen Wilson sat in her home in suburban Chicago, her phone buzzing relentlessly. Her name, now known. Her photo, matched and shared. Her employer, distancing themselves. She turned on the TV just in time to hear her own words echoed back by the news anchor. "I just didn't think he belonged in first class." Karen stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, not in denial, not in confusion, but in the raw horror of someone who just realized the world was watching now and she couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, Dominic sat in silence, eyes on the window, watching as Atlantic jets rolled to silent stops across the tarmac. This wasn't a delay. This was a reckoning. The kind that doesn't come with refunds or rebooking emails. The kind that comes when data, video, and silence align into something undeniable. The kind of tipping point that can no longer be talked around. No denials, no excuses, only consequences. The morning after the grounding. Atlantic Airways initiated Protocol 9, the internal term for high-level media containment and reputational salvage. It had only ever been triggered once before during a mechanical failure that resulted in an emergency landing and class action lawsuit. But this time, the turbulence wasn't in the air. It was on the ground, and it was racial, reputational, and ruinous. Inside a sterile boardroom high above Manhattan, CEO Robert Harrison sat flanked by lawyers, PR advisors, and 2 crisis management firms brought in overnight. "Dominic Taylor is shifting the narrative faster than we can control it," said Amanda Kress, the lead from Monroe Strategies, Atlantic's PR firm. "This isn't just a viral incident anymore. This is a social justice case study in real time." Harrison's jaw flexed. "So fix it." "We tried," Amanda replied, keeping her tone professional. "We offered to settle quietly. His legal team refused. They're not after money. They're after transformation. And right now, we're on the wrong side of that arc." Another exec chimed in. "Sir, if we don't launch a counter-narrative, we risk permanent brand collapse." Harrison waved them on. And so began the first wave of corporate retaliation. By noon, anonymous Atlantic employees began feeding stories to industry blogs, curated leaks alleging that Dominic had been disruptive, refused to cooperate, and even threatened to record crew members. Within hours, a suspicious op-ed appeared in a second-tier business journal titled, "When Status Isn't Enough, Are Some Executives Weaponizing Race?" The author was unverified. The sources, unnamed. But the timing, deliberate. The piece questioned Dominic's motives, suggesting he had a long-term interest in undermining airline partnerships to benefit his own company. Jasmine read the article aloud in the lounge. Dominic listened, unmoved. "They're desperate," he said. "This is the classic misdirection. Smear the victim. Question intent. Pretend injustice is opportunism." Victoria Washington responded coolly. "Let them try. We've already cataloged 63 supporting documents, 7 past incidents, and now 4 whistleblower testimonies. Their deflection only strengthens our case." At that very moment, a second whistleblower emerged. A pilot, anonymous, verified through legal channels. He submitted a sworn statement. In internal briefings, we were advised not explicitly, but implicitly to be aware of optics in premium seating. I've seen passengers moved quietly to preserve appearances. This wasn't a one-off. It was practice. That statement was now in the hands of the FAA, the Senate Transportation Committee, and 3 civil rights organizations. Across Twitter, Smearfail began trending. Even supporters who hadn't followed the full story were now siding with Dominic because they recognized the playbook. Here we go again. Black man stands up. They say he's aggressive. Victim becomes villain the second he refuses to disappear. Classic. Atlantic Airways just proved the point they're trying to deny. Back at Atlantic's HQ, panic escalated. CEO Harrison authorized a national television appearance to correct the record. He was advised to speak from a teleprompter, avoid legal landmines, and show contrition without admitting fault. Instead, he went rogue. On live broadcast, flanked by the company logo and a row of uncomfortable executives, Harrison looked into the camera and said, "What happened to Mr. Taylor is regrettable, but we believe it has been grossly exaggerated. We have zero tolerance for discrimination, and any claims to the contrary are unsubstantiated. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The backlash was instantaneous." Dr. Aisha Johnson posted a split-screen video, Harrison's denial alongside the footage of Dominic being removed. Caption: "This was not a misunderstanding. It was misconduct. Dominic didn't comment publicly, but others did, and louder than before." Civil rights attorney Benjamin Castillo tweeted, "When confronted with documentation, witness statements, and direct video evidence, the CEO of Atlantic still gaslights the public. Unacceptable. The turbulence wasn't just mounting. It had been quantified. Investors dubbed it the Turbulence Index, a real-time metric of corporate collapse driven by moral mismanagement. Atlantic stock fell another 6%. Major advertisers began pulling scheduled campaigns. And on Wall Street, hedge funds quietly moved to short the airline." Back in the lounge, Dominic looked out the window at a grounded Atlantic aircraft. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had tried to silence him. Now they were speaking so loudly, they were undoing themselves. He turned to Jasmine. "Let them fight gravity," he said quietly. "We already learned how to fly without them. At Atlantic Airways headquarters." Tension rippled like a fault line beneath the marble floors. The senior leadership huddled around glowing screens in the executive command center, watching their stock price bleed and media coverage multiply. But the real cracks weren't on Wall Street. They were inside the company. Hours after CEO Robert Harrison's televised denial aired, dismissing Dominic Taylor's removal as regrettable and exaggerated, the internal employee portal exploded with activity. Comments flooded the anonymous message board. "We all know this wasn't a one-off. How dare he act like this isn't happening constantly? I'm a flight attendant. I've seen black passengers reassigned for less. You expect us to smile through this? Not anymore." By nightfall, the private resistance had gone public. An open letter signed by over 400 Atlantic Airways employees, pilots, flight attendants, desk agents, operations staff circulated across LinkedIn and Instagram. "We refuse to be silent participants in a culture that punishes dignity and protects bias. What happened to Mr. Taylor reflects a pattern we've witnessed and, in some cases, been forced to enable. No more." The letter called for transparency, policy reform, and accountability not just from leadership, but from themselves. It was an act of mass defiance, and it sent shockwaves through every layer of the company. In a carpeted hallway outside the executive wing, two mid-level managers stood in whispered debate. "Did you see that letter?" one asked. "They're turning on us." "No," the other replied. "They're standing for what we should have stood for months ago." Inside her small Chicago apartment, Brittany Coleman sat in front of her laptop, watching the letter go viral. Her name wasn't on it, but her heart was in every line. She'd spent the last 12 hours supplying Dominic's legal team with internal memos, cabin crew briefings, and notes from sensitivity training sessions that never addressed race but always emphasized protecting brand value. She had cried twice, and still, she hadn't told her parents. She wasn't ready for their voices to say, "You did the right thing," or worse, "Why didn't you speak sooner?" But deep down, she knew. Silence had been complicity. And now she had chosen resistance. That same night, at a downtown steakhouse in Chicago. James Morris, the gate supervisor who had first dismissed Dominic at the terminal, sat nursing a glass of whiskey. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow supervisors. They're building a list. Anyone mentioned in incident logs from the past 2 years is being flagged. We're getting thrown under the bus. They're offering exit packages. I'm taking mine. James didn't respond. He stared at the bottom of his glass, remembering the moment Lisa Chen showed him Dominic's profile. He hadn't believed her, hadn't cared, because somewhere deep inside, he'd convinced himself the policy was always right, even when the outcome felt wrong. And now the policies were unraveling, and so was his story. At O'Hare, Dr. Aisha Johnson returned home from her shift at the hospital. Her phone had over 600 unread messages. Patients, colleagues, strangers. But one message stood out. From a 19-year-old nursing student in Atlanta. "I saw your video. I've stayed quiet too many times. You gave me courage. Thank you." Aisha stared at the message, tears prickling her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Meanwhile, inside the United Club lounge, Dominic sat reviewing the open letter from Atlantic employees. Jasmine read it beside him, a quiet reverence in her voice. They're finally turning inward. They're choosing truth over tradition. Dominic replied. Victoria joined the conversation from her tablet. We're seeing fractures and opportunity. If even 10% of staff testify, the class action strengthens exponentially. And if 50% walk out. Jasmine asked. Dominic closed the document. Then this isn't just a lawsuit, he said. It's a movement. Outside the window, Atlantic jets remained parked, lights dim, motionless under the night sky. But inside the corporation, something was moving. A culture built on silence was facing its first real rebellion. not from outside protesters, but from the people who once held it up. At 7:02 a.m., the boardroom of Atlantic Airways' New York headquarters was at maximum capacity. The windows overlooking the skyline might as well have been walls. No one was looking out. All eyes were fixed on the real storm, the collapse of control. CEO Robert Harrison sat at the head of the table, pale and visibly fraying. He had just come off a phone call with the airline's largest shareholder, who had delivered the kind of warning no executive wants to hear. If you can't contain this, we'll contain it for you. To his left, the CFO reported flatly. Market cap down another $500 million overnight. Creditors are re-evaluating long-term debt. To his right, the VP of Investor Relations whispered. BlackRock and Vanguard both canceled their quarterly calls. They're moving their capital. The room was imploding, not with yelling or slammed fists, but with silence so heavy it sucked the oxygen out. And then it came, the vote. A simple proposal. Should Robert Harrison remain as Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Airways? Hands went up, then down, then counted. 9 votes for removal, 3 against, 2 abstained. Just like that. After 17 years at the helm, Robert Harrison, the man who once said, "Our customers know their place in the sky," had been grounded permanently. He stood slowly, shoulders tight, no speech, no defense. Just a short exhale as he walked out, passing portraits of himself on the hallway walls. By noon, his name had been scrubbed from the company's website. The old guard had fallen, and the ripples traveled instantly. Across terminals, whispers turned into cheers. Flight crews refreshed their apps and saw the leadership update. In Chicago, Patricia Armstrong, once corporate damage control incarnate, was approached by a representative of the board. "We need someone credible. You've been honest throughout. The employees trust you." Patricia hesitated, then nodded. Across the employee portal, a new internal memo appeared under her name. Today marks a turning point, not just in leadership, but in culture. We will no longer tolerate the behavior that brought us here, not in secret, not in silence, and not in policy. The comments beneath it were immediate. "Finally, we're watching. Don't waste this moment. Now bring Dominic back in the United Club Lounge." Dominic scrolled through the headlines. Atlantic CEO ousted. After discrimination scandal, employees revolt airline. Faces historic cultural reckoning from seat 2A to corporate meltdown. How one passenger changed everything. He turned to Victoria on the video call. Confirmation. Victoria nodded. "It's official. Board voted Harrison out. They've offered a settlement proposal, but we're not accepting." Dominic didn't flinch. No checks, no silence. At that moment, Jordan Ellis joined the call, her voice electric. "Dominic, the numbers are unreal. Dr. Johnson's video is over 15 million views. Your LinkedIn post just hit 3 million impressions. It's become a movement." Dominic leaned back. "Not my movement. Ours. And it's not finished." Across the city, in a quiet midtown apartment, Brittany Coleman refreshed her inbox. An unsigned email had arrived from an internal ethics committee. "We commend your courage. You may be called to testify." She exhaled shakily, then picked up her phone and pressed record. "My name is Brittany Coleman. I was the flight attendant on Atlantic Airways Flight 372, and I'm here to tell the truth." She posted it, and within minutes, it began to spread. In flight crew lounges, on personal Facebook walls, in WhatsApp threads, other employees followed, one by one, gate agents, pilots, Maintenance coordinators. They didn't post rage. They posted regret. I didn't stop it when I saw it. Now I want to help fix it. This culture made me complicit. I'm breaking that cycle today. No more silent boarding passes. No more silent complicity. By dusk, over 100 employees had publicly committed to a new internal campaign fly-right demanding mandatory anti-discrimination training, transparent removal metrics, and racial equity reviews. Dominic watched it unfold in real time. Jasmine turned to him, voice low. They're not just reacting anymore. They're rebuilding. He nodded. This was never about removing one man from one seat. He said, it was about removing the system that made that seat unsafe for people like us. And now that system was collapsing, not through violence, not through vengeance, but through the one force it couldn't outmaneuver: truth spoken out loud by the very people who had once kept it quiet. It began with an email, not a press release, not a boardroom statement, just a plain, direct message sent to every Atlantic Airways employee at 8:00 am sharp, Eastern Standard Time. Subject: beginning again. Together from Dr. Maya Johnson, Interim CEO. We failed. We failed Mr. Dominic Taylor. We failed every passenger who has been made to feel unwelcome, unseen, or unsafe. And we failed ourselves by accepting silence as policy. That ends today. The message was unlike anything the airline had ever issued: personal, unvarnished, and resolute. Dr. Maya Johnson, a former executive at a competing airline with a decorated career in diversity reform, had been quietly nominated as interim CEO less than 24 hours after Robert Harrison's removal. Her first act wasn't damage control. It was acknowledgement. Within minutes, screenshots of her email flooded social media. Employees reposted it with captions like, "Finally, someone who sees us. Real leadership sounds like this. Let's build something better." Across Atlantic's infrastructure, from digital ops to HR to gate terminals, operations slowed to a crawl. Not from chaos, but from something rarer: reorientation. Managers were instructed to cancel non-essential meetings. All training modules were paused, and every department received the same directive. Listen, learn, repair. Inside the United Club lounge. Dominic read the email twice. Jasmine watched him carefully, unsure what he would feel. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. But for the first time in days, he looked lighter. "She understands," he said quietly. "She knows this is about more than me." Victoria joined the video call moments later. "Dominic, you should know Maya reached out privately. She's requesting a direct conversation. Not as PR, not for show. One human to another." He nodded. "Schedule it. Not to make peace. To start building something that lasts. Across terminals in Atlanta, Houston, Los Angeles, and Newark. Something unprecedented unfolded. Atlantic grounded all remaining non-critical domestic flights for 4 hours. The reason: organizational realignment for equity reform. It was the first time in UT's aviation history that a commercial airline had voluntarily halted operations, not for weather, not for strikes, but for reflection. In the crew lounges, facilitators led discussion circles, pilots, attendants, mechanics sitting in groups, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tears. Some shared moments they'd buried. A black flight attendant describing how she was routinely assigned to coach despite seniority. A gay gate agent admitting he'd been told to tone it down during international flights. A Latina baggage handler recounting how her safety complaints were ignored until repeated by a white male colleague. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest, and in every space, facilitators ended with the same question. What kind of airline do you want to serve? Back in Chicago, Brittany Coleman was brought in for a closed-door session with Dr. Maya Johnson and members of the new Ethics and Equity Committee. She expected discipline. What she received was purpose. You weren't the problem, Dr. Johnson told her. You were the result of one. And now, you can be part of the solution. They offered Brittany a new role, Director of In-Flight Equity Training. It came with support, resources, and the kind of agency she never thought she'd be trusted with again. Meanwhile, Dominic took a private call with Dr. Johnson. No cameras, no press, just two professionals, each carrying the weight of systems they didn't build, but now had the power to change. What happened to you, Maya said, was the final crack in a foundation that's been crumbling for years. I can't erase it, but I can ensure it becomes a cornerstone. Dominic was silent for a long beat. Then I'm not here for revenge, but I won't settle for gestures. You rebuild this airline the right way, or we'll finish what we started. I wouldn't expect anything less, she replied. The next morning, Atlantic announced sweeping reforms. Mandatory bias and equity training for all staff, developed in partnership with civil rights leaders. A permanent equity review board with employee, passenger, and third-party oversight. Transparent demographic data on passenger removals, shared quarterly with the public. Revised boarding and seating policies that removed discretion in conflict resolution. The creation of the Taylor Fellowship, a scholarship program for underrepresented youth pursuing aviation and transportation careers. Dominic didn't ask for his name to be used. They chose to use it anyway, because the world needed a reminder that Seat 2A wasn't just a location, it was a turning point, and from its ashes, something new was beginning to rise. For every system that collapses, there's always a shadow, a remnant of the old world that refuses to go quietly. And as Atlantic Airways took its first fragile steps toward redemption, that shadow began to stir. It started with a private conference call, held off the record, among a handful of former executives, legacy investors, and legal advisors no longer seated at the main table. Their tone wasn't panicked. It was cold, calculated. She's moving too fast, said one voice, a former VP who had quietly resigned the day Harrison was voted out. Johnson's reforms are radical. She's gutting the company culture. Another added, the Taylor situation gave her leverage, but she's going to bankrupt us with these diversity initiatives. And the real fear. It wasn't about money. It was about power. Specifically, who would hold it now? Across conservative media outlets, opinion pieces began to appear suspiciously aligned in tone. Are corporations caving to viral outrage? Woke airlines, where accountability replaces excellence boarding passes and virtue signals. Is this the future of flight? These weren't grassroots think pieces. They were planted. And the source, a media strategy group known for weaponizing backlash, funded by anonymous donors who had previously backed anti-regulatory campaigns in other industries. The message was clear. Dominic Taylor hadn't just embarrassed Atlantic Airways, he'd threatened a worldview. One where power didn't have to answer to fairness. And now, the counteroffensive had begun. Inside Atlantic's communications department, newly hired Director of Equity Engagement, Brittany Coleman, received an anonymous tip. Subject line: internal sabotage. Read now. It contained screenshots from a group chat involving mid-level managers. The messages were damning. Just keep nodding until this blows over. Let them think we've changed. We'll go back to normal by Q3. I'm not wasting real effort on bias training. It's all for PR anyway. Brittany forwarded it immediately to Dr. Maya Johnson, who called an emergency ethics meeting within the hour. This is what resistance looks like now. Maya told her team, not banners, not protests, undermining change by pretending to support it. Across town, in a quieter corner of Chicago. Dominic sat with his former professor and mentor, Dr. Roland Marks, at a tucked-away cafe. Dr. Marks had been following the entire saga with pride, but also with caution. Progress invites performance, he said, stirring his tea. There are people who would rather fake change than face it. Dominic nodded. I see it. I've seen it before. Boardrooms full of allies who disappear after the headline fades. So what will you do now? Dominic leaned forward. Build something that doesn't need their permission. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Senator Anthony Richardson was receiving calls, not all of them supportive. Several committee members from opposing parties began asking questions laced with familiar code. Isn't this overcorrecting? We support justice. Of course. But should we really be disrupting aviation to this extent? Let's not create a regulatory nightmare based on one man's experience. Richardson didn't flinch. He had prepared for this. He issued a public statement the next morning. The grounding of Atlantic Airways wasn't about one seat. It was about a pattern. And anyone who believes this is about political correctness hasn't read the data. We don't regulate fairness. We regulate safety and discrimination. Let me remind you, endangers lives. But the backlash had already begun to seep into algorithms, comment sections, and even airline customer reviews. Dominic's team noted an uptick in targeted misinformation. Fake posts circulated claiming he'd demanded a $10 million payout he hadn't, or that he was launching a competing airline he wasn't, or that he had faked the incident altogether, a lie easily disproven by video evidence. Jasmine brought the reports to him. They're trying to poison the narrative, she warned. Dominic stayed calm. That means we're making progress. You only get this kind of resistance when truth threatens comfort. Still, they pivoted strategy. NextGen launched a public education campaign titled Not Just One Seat. It featured real stories from travelers of color submitted anonymously about being removed, ignored, or profiled during air travel. No actors, no drama, just quiet, heartbreaking facts. And with each story, the same tagline, dignity should never be a privilege. The campaign caught fire, but so did the opposition. Dominic knew what was coming next, the most dangerous phase of any reform effort. The appearance of change without the will to enforce it. And that's where movements died. Unless someone was watching, unless someone refused to look away, unless someone, somewhere, kept demanding that the new world be real, not rehearsed, and that someone, this time, would be all of them. Dominic Taylor had been silent for 48 hours. In media cycles, that's an eternity. But in strategy, it's the difference between reaction and domination. While the opposition whispered and manipulated behind closed doors, Dominic and his team were preparing something far more potent than a rebuttal. They were preparing a reckoning. We're not fighting noise. Dominic told his team inside a glass-walled conference room at NextGen's Chicago headquarters. We're exposing the pattern behind it. This isn't about me anymore. It's about how often this happens and how deeply the system relies on silence to survive. Jordan Ellis, his PR director, laid out the response plan. Phase 1, public exposure of the false narratives. We're debunking every smear in a single thread with hard evidence. Phase 2. Partner organizations ACLU, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Color of Change will amplify our push with data-backed campaigns. Phase 3. The big one. Jasmine leaned forward. You mean the audit? Dominic nodded. Full industry audit. Airline by airline. 5 years of removal data. We'll show the world what discrimination looks like, not as a headline, but as a statistic. Victoria, Washington. On video call from Jasutsit. Chimed in. The FAA is already cooperating. They've greenlit an independent task force. You're going to chair it. Dominic paused. A full circle moment. From being removed from his seat to overseeing national compliance standards. Let's proceed, he said quietly, simultaneously. Brittany Coleman, now officially Atlantic Airways Director of In-Flight Equity Training, launched her own strike from within. She greenlit the company's first mandatory bias disclosure report, detailing the frequency of passenger removals by race, gender, ticket class, and reason cited. The numbers were worse than expected. In 2023 alone, 71% of passengers removed for non-compliance were Black or Latino. 83% of removals happened in premium cabins. In 61% of those cases, the removed passenger had the correct seating assignment. The report was reviewed internally and then leaked publicly by an anonymous staffer within 48 hours. Atlantic's new leadership didn't deny it. Dr. Maya Johnson confirmed the leak in a press conference. We have no interest in hiding the truth, she said calmly. We'd rather confront our failures head-on than pretend they don't exist. And we invite our competitors to do the same. That last line hit like a missile. Within hours, social media erupted with demands for similar disclosures from United, Delta, and American. Hashtags surged. Audit the airlines, truth in turbulence, passengers deserve proof. Back at NextGen, Dominic watched the press conference from a side monitor. He didn't smile. Not yet. Because he wasn't done. The following morning, Dominic appeared on 60 Minutes for his first full-length televised interview since the incident. The set was minimal. His tone was calm, but his words, precise, surgical, devastating. When a passenger pays for a seat, they're paying for dignity, he said. But for many of us, that seat comes with conditions. We have to perform respectability. We have to prove we belong. And even then, someone can still decide we don't. The interviewer asked what justice looked like. Justice, Dominic replied, is a system where who you are never outweighs what you've paid for, what you've earned, or what you deserve. Justice is when policies outlive apologies. The episode aired on Sunday. By Monday, the ripple effect reached Congress. Senator Anthony Richardson introduced the Passenger Equity and Safety Act, a bipartisan bill requiring mandatory bias training for all airline personnel, demographic transparency on passenger removals, federal penalties for proven discrimination in airline operations. Meanwhile, Dominic launched a tech partnership with Google's AI division and several civil rights organizations to develop Bias Map, an app allowing passengers to log, verify, and track discrimination events during air travel. Live, secure, irrefutable. It wasn't just an app. It was a mirror held up to the industry. Transparency, Dominic said at the launch, is the beginning of accountability. This isn't revenge, it's infrastructure. Even his critics struggled to counter the logic. No outrage, no slander, just data, strategy, truth. At Atlantic, Former loyalists who had quietly sabotaged reforms now faced internal investigation, anonymous chat logs, whistleblower leaks, and digital footprints exposed everything. And for the first time in decades, consequences followed collusion. Some resigned quietly. Others were terminated with cause. The company issued a rare statement. Resistance to equity is resistance to excellence. We will not tolerate internal sabotage, no matter the title or tenure. Dominic didn't respond directly. He didn't need to. Because the counterstrike wasn't a shout. It was a blueprint. And now the industry was building on it. The day the truth finally landed wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't on a stage or in a press conference. It was on the tarmac. At 10:34 a.m., local time, at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest in the nation. Atlantic Airways Flight 678 to New York was halted mid-boarding, not for weather, not for security, but for clarity. An announcement came over the intercom, shaking both passengers and crew from routine ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Priya Mehta. We've been instructed to hold boarding for an FAA transparency audit. Representatives will be joining us momentarily to observe crew protocols and passenger interactions. We appreciate your patience. Gasps. Murmurs. Phones came out instantly, because nothing like this had ever happened before. 2 FAA officials boarded the plane with clipboards and quiet authority. They didn't interrupt. They didn't accuse. They simply watched every interaction, every nod, every word exchanged between crew and passengers. Live observers. Real-time oversight. It was the first test case of the new FAA compliance program co-authored by Dominic Taylor and Senator Anthony Richardson, the Passenger Equity and Safety Protocol. And it was already being implemented. Across the country, a dozen other airports experienced the same unannounced procedure. News of the coordinated effort leaked within an hour. Setting off a media storm, FAA. Execute surprise audits across U.S. Airports transparency in the sky. A new era of passenger rights. Dominic Taylor's vision becoming federal standard. Dominic watched it unfold from a private conference room in San Francisco, where he was preparing for a keynote at the Global Equity in Aviation Summit. He had turned down the invitation 3 times. Now, he knew he had to speak. That afternoon, as cameras rolled and press lined the walls, Dominic stepped onto a minimalist stage before an audience of aviation CEOs, policymakers, transportation executives, and global press. He didn't use a teleprompter. He didn't need to. You don't need me to explain what happened on Flight 372. The world saw it. What matters now isn't my story. It's yours. Every airline in this room has stories. It's buried in incident logs and HR emails. Every executive here has approved policies that prioritize conflict avoidance over customer dignity. But there's no avoiding this now. Equity isn't a buzzword. It's a safety standard. And if your company doesn't have it, you're not just outdated. You're unsafe. Applause erupted, not polite, not obligatory. It was earned. Later that evening, the FAA officially released the first wave of compliance data to the public. It confirmed everything Dominic and his team had documented. Atlantic Airways led the industry in disproportionate removals. Black passengers were 4.2 times more likely to be reported for non-compliance despite lower rates of actual conflict. 87% of customer disputes in premium cabins involved passengers of color. In 78% of cases, crew sided with the customer who first initiated the dispute, even when that person violated policy. These weren't statistics. They were confessions written in data. Across social media, the numbers took visual form. graphs, maps, infographics showing systemic bias like scars across the sky. A new trend surged. Truth on the Tarmac passengers began sharing their own stories using the hashtag 2019 was told to move to coach after a white passenger felt uncomfortable. I said nothing. Not anymore. I was escorted off for speaking Arabic on the phone. They called it a disturbance. Thank you, Dominic Taylor, for proving we weren't imagining this. But not everyone was clapping. Inside certain aviation unions, pushback stirred quiet memos questioning the audits, calling them excessive, warning about crew over-scrutiny. Dominic expected this. He addressed it head-on in an open letter the next morning. This isn't about blaming employees. It's about liberating them from bad systems. You don't fix culture by hiding it. You fix it by confronting it together. The letter was signed not just by Dominic, but by over 300 Atlantic Airways employees, including Brittany Coleman, who now headed in-flight equity compliance. Together, they were making it impossible to turn back. Meanwhile, the FAA confirmed that the audit program would become permanent. Airlines that failed 3 consecutive surprise audits would face sanctions ranging from fines to operating restrictions. It wasn't a threat. It was policy. And for the first time, passengers across America felt protected by structure, not just by chance. Dominic stood in the corner of the airport terminal later that day, watching families board, a black mother with her son, a South Asian businessman, an elderly Latina grandmother assisted by a gate agent. No stares, no whispers, just routine. That was the change he had fought for. Not glory, not revenge, just normalcy. And finally, it was here. The sign above Gate B12 glowed softly. Atlantic Airways Flight 101. Destination San Francisco on time. It was the first time since the incident that Dominic Taylor had booked a ticket with the airline. Not to test them, not to challenge them, but because they had finally become what he always believed they could be. He arrived early, no entourage, no cameras, just Dominic, a slim carry-on, and a single seat reserved under his name, Seat 2A. At the check-in counter, the attendant recognized him immediately. She didn't flinch, didn't fumble. Instead, she stood tall and said, "Mr. Taylor, welcome back. It's an honor. No theatrics, no apologies, just dignity." As he approached the gate, a group of uniformed employees stood to the side not to block him, but to greet him. Among them, Brittany Coleman. Her once nervous smile had transformed into calm leadership. "We've come a long way," she said quietly. Dominic nodded. "And you helped get us here." Boarding began. There was no commotion, no confusion, no standoff. When Dominic reached his row, 2A was empty, polished, waiting. A small placard rested on the seat. Reserved in honor of progress. Reserved in honor of persistence. Across the aisle, a young black boy nudged his mother. "That's him," he whispered. "The guy from the video." Dominic caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. The boy smiled like he'd been seen by history itself. Meanwhile, Atlantic Airways was not just rebuilding. It was leading. Under Dr. Maya Johnson's leadership, the airline had launched the most comprehensive diversity overhaul in UTST aviation history. They had implemented a real-time passenger equity monitoring system, trained over 12,000 employees using new empathy-based simulations, promoted the industry's most diverse leadership team, including the first black woman COO of a major airline, partnered with NextGen to integrate bias map into their passenger app, empowering travelers to report discrimination in real time. And most importantly, they had done something no airline had ever attempted: public restitution. Over the past 90 days, Atlantic Airways issued written apologies to 137 passengers removed under suspect circumstances. They refunded tickets, issued lifetime status upgrades, invited each person to a one-on-one with senior leadership. One of those passengers, a deaf woman removed for non-responsiveness, posted her apology letter on Instagram. It read, "You were not at fault. We were. Your silence was not defiance, it was your language. And we failed to listen." The post went viral. Redemption had a new template, and it wasn't defensiveness. It was repair in the Capitol. Senator Anthony Richardson held a televised hearing titled "Systemic Reform in Commercial Aviation." 1 year later, Dominic Taylor was the keynote speaker. Standing in front of the Senate Transportation Committee, he didn't speak in anger. He spoke in vision. Justice isn't only what we demand, it's what we design. When an airline changed how it boards, it changed how millions experience dignity. When a flight crew changed how they interpret silence, it changed who feels safe to fly. And when we stopped tolerating the way things are, we created space for how they should be. The hearing concluded with bipartisan agreement to expand the Passenger Equity and Safety Act, introducing new accountability measures across all forms of transportation: buses, trains, cruise lines. The ripple effect had become a wave of reform. Back at the airport, as Flight 101 climbed into clear skies, Dominic sat by the window in seat 2A. The light bounced off the wing, and for the first time in over a year, he allowed himself to breathe without calculation. He didn't check the crew's expressions, didn't glance at the seat across the aisle. He just flew. In the row behind him, the young boy watched quietly, scribbling in a notebook. His mother peeked over his shoulder and saw what he had written. "One day, I will be the reason someone else doesn't get kicked out of seat 2A. Dominic turned his head slightly. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, high above the earth, in a plane that once threw him out, his flight path had become someone else's runway. And that was redemption. The boardroom at Atlantic Airways was full again, but this time, it wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with consequences. On the wall-mounted display, a digital feed tracked 3 columns: employee ethics violations, discrimination case settlements, leadership accountability outcomes. The numbers weren't red. They were resolved. Dr. Maya Johnson stood at the head of the table, flanked by legal, PR, operations, and HR no longer fighting fires, but completing audits. "This is the final phase," she said. "We will not allow old ghosts to linger in new walls." The room nodded. The old guard had not gone quietly. Over the past month, investigations revealed that several senior-level managers had actively worked to delay compliance, alter removal logs, and pressure whistleblowers into silence. Among them, James Morris, the gate supervisor, who first dismissed Dominic with a shrug, and Michael Parker, the lead flight attendant, who had supported Karen Wilson's complaint without checking her boarding pass. Both were summoned to appear before Atlantic's new Employee Ethics Tribunal. No lawyers, no PR buffers, just the truth. James Morris sat stiffly, dressed in a suit he hadn't worn since his promotion years earlier. He avoided eye contact as the tribunal read off the findings. Failure to verify seating assignment. Inappropriate delegation of passenger removal authority. dismissive behavior in the face of racial discrimination, retaliatory comments captured in internal communications. He offered no defense, just a half-hearted excuse. We were following procedure, to which the ethics chair replied, "Then your procedure was broken, and now so is your tenure." His termination was immediate. Michael Parker followed, his confidence replaced by practiced regret. "I didn't think it would go that far," he said. "We've seen seat disputes before, but this wasn't a dispute." The chair replied, "This was dereliction of duty and of empathy." Michael was offered a choice public apology and restorative justice service within the company's new community reconciliation program, or formal dismissal with record of misconduct. He chose to stay. "I want to help fix what I helped ruin." Back in Chicago, Dominic Taylor received the tribunal results in a confidential email. He didn't celebrate, but he did feel something shift, not just in the system, but in the language of power. For the first time, consequences weren't reserved for the loudest. They were reserved for the most quietly dangerous, those who enabled harm by calling it standard. Meanwhile, Karen Wilson's story had faded from headlines, but not from memory. Her former social circle in Chicago had all but vanished. Her luxury brand employer had terminated her quietly, and her divorce from William had been finalized under mutual agreement, but very little reconciliation. But what made the greatest impact was what she couldn't control. Her quote, "He didn't look like he belonged in first class," had become immortalized. On T-shirts, on protest signs, in textbooks, used not as condemnation but as a lesson, at a university symposium on race, space, and access. Students debated the meaning of the quote, dissecting it like literature. Professors paired it with case studies and policy discussions. Karen Wilson had become a case study in unconscious bias consciously exposed. And she would never be anonymous again. Back at Atlantic, the company had officially concluded its 12-month reconciliation cycle. Over 4,000 employees had completed new equity programs. Customer satisfaction among passengers of color had increased by 41%. And internal surveys showed the highest morale scores in the company's history. But the final change came in a symbolic form. A plaque bolted into the jetbridge at O'Hare International Airport Gate C-17, where it all began. It read, "Seat 2A, the spark of change." In honor of those who refused to be silent, may this always be a space where dignity boards first. Passengers paused to read it. Crew members touched it like a ritual. Children asked what it meant, and employees answered with pride. Brittany Coleman led the ribbon cutting, flanked by Dr. Maya Johnson and flight crews representing every demographic, every department, every level. Dominic wasn't present. He had declined quietly, preferring the moment belonged to them. But that same day, as Flight 372, now renamed Flight 2A, prepared to depart for the first time since the grounding, a flight attendant made a special announcement before takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we fly not just forward in distance, but in history. This flight honors the seat that sparked reflection, responsibility, and reform. May every passenger here know you are seen. You belong." The cabin erupted in quiet applause. Outside, on the tarmac, sunlight hit the wing just right and reflected into Gate C-17 like a signal. The final flight had lifted, but the movement, it had only just begun. 1 year had passed. The calendar marked it with quiet symmetry. Same day, same hour, same airport, but everything else had changed. Dominic Taylor stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of San Francisco International's private terminal, His reflection overlapped with the image of a sleek Atlantic Airways aircraft being prepped at the gate. The new fleet design proudly displaying a small but meaningful emblem near the nose. A gold outline of Seat 2A. He sipped coffee, not out of ritual, but contemplation. This wasn't a victory lap. It was an observation deck for legacy. Behind him, a team of young entrepreneurs, all recipients of the Taylor Johnson Equity Fellowship, gathered with quiet purpose. Engineers, designers, policy students, most of them Black, brown, first-generation college grads, or children of immigrants. Their innovations were already shaping the future bias-free booking algorithms, accessible mobile boarding, AI language tools for non-native English speakers, and every one of them had been inspired by what happened 1 year ago on a jetbridge in Chicago. Not because of the headlines, because of the principles. Dominic turned and addressed them, his voice calm but weighted with the truth he had carried his whole life. This story was never about a seat. It was about a pattern and the world's willingness to let it repeat. You're not here to be tokens. You're here to build systems that make justice automatic. Systems that don't ask who you are before they serve you. That's what legacy really is. It's not what they remember about you. It's what they don't have to repeat because of you. Applause filled the room, but not the kind meant for ego. It was applause for clarity, for guidance, for fuel. Later that afternoon, Dominic boarded Flight 2A this time as a keynote guest, not a cautionary tale. The crew didn't treat him as a spectacle. They treated him as standard. Captain Raquel Martinez greeted him personally. "We studied your case in training. You changed everything. Thank you for letting us be part of it." Dominic simply nodded. "Thank you for flying it forward." Midway through the flight, a pre-recorded video played across the cabin, not an advertisement, but a message of reflection. It featured passengers who had spoken up, staff who had come forward, and survivors of similar discrimination incidents who had once felt they had no voice. The screen faded to black with one final sentence. "Progress isn't a headline. It's a habit." Upon landing, Dominic was escorted not to a press line or ribbon cutting, but to a small garden space outside Terminal 2, where a modest sculpture stood a bronze boarding pass, cracked down the center, but illuminated by a beam of light cast from an overhead fixture. At its base, an inscription. To those who were told they didn't belong, you always did, and you always will. As night fell, Dominic returned to his hotel room. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and reviewed the latest metrics from the FAA. Discriminatory removals had dropped 43% industry-wide. Unexplained seat reassignment cases had decreased by 58%. Passenger satisfaction among historically marginalized travelers had reached an all-time high. But more than numbers, the tone had shifted. People were asking new questions. Flight crews were intervening early. Passengers were filming less because there was less to document. And children who watched from the sidelines a year ago were now sending handwritten letters to Dominic's office. "Thank you for standing up for people like my mom. My teacher showed us your story in class. I want to build something like you did, not for money, but for fairness." Dominic closed his laptop and leaned back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. He thought of his father, a bus mechanic, who once gave up his seat so a white passenger could sit comfortably. He thought of his mother who told him, "They may ask for your silence, son, but never offer them your dignity." He thought of Dr. Aisha Johnson, who had spoken up when it was hardest. And he thought of Brittany Coleman, who went from being complicit to courageous. This wasn't a story with a hero. It was a story with many awakenings. Dominic rose and walked to the window, overlooking the quiet airfield. From above, everything looked small, even the biggest planes, even the tallest terminals. But he knew better. From ground level, one seat had the power to change the entire sky. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.